Today's episode is a continuation of last week's episode where we talked with Kyle Benson about anxious attachment. Today, we're going to continue to the other half of that conversation, and we're going to talk about avoidant attachment styles. Now, people who deal with an avoidant attachment style, they kind of feel like they are never good enough. They're constantly feeling criticized, like no matter what they do, they're always falling short. They're always a disappointment. They kind of just pull away from any sort of conflict or intense emotional experiences that can be really overwhelming for them. So when you get an anxious person and an avoidant person together, which often happens, it can really spell disaster for a relationship unless you can break this cycle of one person kind of smothering the other person needing validation and the other person needing some space and some breathing room and feeling kind of overwhelmed by all of the emotional onslaught of their partner. So today we're going to talk to Kyle about that avoidant attachment style. I hope you enjoy it. Once again, this interview was part of the interview series that I do on a regular basis in the Epic Marriage Club. You can find out more about that if you want to watch these interviews live at epicmarriageclub.com. And I hope you enjoyed today's interview. Kyle, welcome back. Everybody, welcome to another live stream, a little live workshop here with Kyle Benson. He has been so generous with his time. We did a podcast together a couple of weeks ago where we kind of summarized attachment theory and in different attachment styles and couples. And then he agreed to come back and do two workshops, one on anxious attachment style and the other one on avoidance. So if you missed the last one, which was anxious attachment style, you can go back and watch that for sure. And it's kind of the other side of the coin we're going to be talking about here when it comes to attachment styles, which is the more avoidant style. So Kyle, I just want to hand it off to you. Can we start by just talking a little bit about maybe how to identify whether you or your partner might be a little bit possess more of that avoidant nature? And then let's dive into what do we do about it once we've kind of identified it?
Yeah, I think we kind of need to start a little bit of exploring what avoidant attachment is.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple different ways to look at it. In the attachment research, there's really kind of four things they focus on. There is, in terms of attachment styles, there's secure. There's this preoccupied anxious partner, which we talked about last week or 2 weeks ago. And then there's two different types of kind of avoidant. There's dismissively avoidant, which we're going to spend a lot of time on. And then there's fearful avoidant, which comes from a lot more trauma and some other things that come up with that. Avoidant, just like the anxious attachment style, avoidant attachment is a style. It is actually a strategy in how we relate and stay in relationship to other people. And at its core, it is developed in interactions, typically with parents, caregivers, as well as romantic partners. And what happens is if you grew up in a family where your parents didn't really give you a lot of emotional attention, didn't validate your feelings, or said, toughen up, deal with it, you kind of learn this message that, okay, if I'm going to survive in this world, I have to do it alone. So you develop this self-reliance and this dependency on yourself. You also don't get a ton of attunement to your emotional needs or your feelings. And so you don't really develop that insight of, oh, feeling and connecting to my emotions is healthy and beneficial to me. It actually is painful and no one supports me in that. So why do it? It's not something I need to deal with. So again, all these strategies kind of get developed early on. And what they lead to is a lot of kind of challenges when it comes to intimate relationships. And what we know from the research is this: when distressing things happen in an intimate relationship, the attachment system, which actually activates to get us to become closer with people and motivates us to be closer emotionally and physically, and reach out to them for survival purposes, people who have avoidant attachment styles actually deactivate that. That's their strategy. They actually don't activate their attachment system. They do the opposite. They distance, they disengage, they isolate, they don't stay committed. And so often romantic partners will say, my lover only loves me at an arm's length. I can never get close to them. They don't disclose to me what's going on for them. They're not committed. I don't know where they stand with me. And so again, the self-reliance and the independence, while it is a strategy, it also makes it really tough to get close to someone you care about. And that's really where we start to get into some issues, a lot of conflict, and a whole bunch of other things that kind of cause problems that both partners don't enjoy, and actually do not show how much the avoidant partner cares about their anxious partner, and other things that are underneath the surface that cannot be expressed or have a tough time being expressed because of the strategies. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it totally makes sense. And I want to slow this down just a little bit because I think you just fire hosed us with a lot of really valuable information, and I want to make sure that people don't miss it.
Yeah.
A couple of things I just want to touch on really quick. So when you were describing kind of how an avoidant attachment develops in somebody, you mentioned things like, I wrote down here, like maybe you were told to toughen up growing up and do things on your own. You were never really taught to connect with your emotions and learn to identify them or express them. And it felt a little scary maybe to do that, or like threatening.
Or even regulate them, right?
Yeah.
Right. If you are taught that your feelings are unsafe and you feel them, you bottle them, you sub them away, you pretend they're not there. And that's, again, it's an emotional strategy. But it doesn't, I mean, we'll talk about this more, but it doesn't work in the long run.
So this to me screams that culturally it's probably more of a male issue than a female issue. Not universally, but just generally speaking, probably more men deal with the avoidant attachment style than women. Would that be a fair assessment?
That is, from past research, that is an accurate statement. I definitely do have avoidant women that I've worked with.
For sure.
I don't think this is strictly a gender dynamic, but I think culturally, because of how people are raised, men tend to show up more avoidant, particularly because there is not an ideology of being connected to difficult feelings. Oh, you feel fear? Well, that's your problem. Grow up, man up, right?
Yeah. There's
not much space to sit with that stuff when it's very normal, very human emotions.
And the other thing that I thought was really, really important that I want to reemphasize maybe like throughout this entire conversation is just because you have a partner who's avoidant doesn't mean they don't care about your relationship. If they're withdrawn, if it doesn't seem like they're emotionally invested, if they're kind of an emotional recluse, that doesn't mean they don't care or that they don't love you. And I think you touching on that is really powerful, because I think that's the message that's often received by the partner of somebody who's avoidant is they just don't care. They're not invested. They're checked out. And that can be a really frustrating thing. And my hope is that as we have this conversation and it can develop a little bit more empathy and compassion, and that we can start to see the heart of what is going on with an avoidant partner and help them to kind of maybe re-engage. So,
and I think kind of touching on that, right? I want to focus on the partner for a second. What the partner experiences is what the avoidant person does to themselves, right? The partner who gets their feelings dismissed, who has issues they bring to the relationship that never get resolved, is a reflection of the avoidance partner's difficulty with connecting with difficult feelings, and a reflection of the avoidant partner's feeling helpless and being like, I'm just not going to deal with that. Right. And when I deal with avoidant partners and we talk about what's the story you tell about yourself, like, what's this mean when this happens? I'm a failure. I'm the worst partner. Why is she with me? Why do they want to connect with me? I can never do it right.
Right.
So there's a lot of shame with this avoidant attachment style that never really gets expressed. And because part of the also avoidant attachment style is there's very little self-disclosure. There's not, yeah, I feel this way or this way. It's all bottled up. It's all kept inside, which makes it really tough. And in extreme cases, someone who's been avoidant for a long time will detach from relationships as a way to protect themselves because they feel like they can never do it right. And so that's another thing that we just have to hold as we talk about this too.
I love that. That creates so much clarity for me and understanding. Like if somebody has a really hard time dealing with their own emotions, how are they going to have the capacity or the energy to deal with somebody else's?
Mm-hmm. And that's what we see in Dr. Gottman's Love Lab. I mean, we can talk about that for a moment, but what he found is that these partners who had an emotionally dismissing philosophy, which is a very avoidant strategy, don't have the ability to hold their partner's difficult emotions. They have a low threshold. And so someone who's more secure is going to have a lot more room to be like, oh, you're upset. Tell me about that. Someone who's avoidant, oh, you're upset. When I'm upset, I just go do this thing, or I drink, or I go do this other thing. So they don't have the capacity. They haven't had someone help them build that. to actually be able to hold their partner's difficult feelings. And so they distance, they cut off, they shut down, and they disconnect.
What's the effect of that over the long term? Like if we have a partner who can't manage their own emotions, doesn't want to confront them, doesn't know how to confront them, doesn't have the bandwidth to confront them, and therefore doesn't have the bandwidth to deal with or help with their partner's emotions, and they're constantly retreating, what does the long-term impact on a relationship look like?
I mean, to be blunt, destruction in a way. It sadly, I mean, and this is the problem. The strategy, while it feels like it works temporarily, kind of sweeps things under the rug, doesn't work in the long term.
Yeah.
And what Gottman's research showed is that particularly in heterosexual relationships, the husband who was dismissive was predictive of divorce or a relationship staying stable in terms of dissatisfaction for at least 4 years. And that was predicted of, I mean, he was able to use just that metric to predict 80% of how stable the relationship would be, which is huge.
That's massive.
Mm-hmm. And Gottman calls this like
for instance, I don't want to override that. I want you to keep going, but I want to just hit home for our listeners who may not like. You're way more into the research world than I am, and I'm probably way more into the research world than they are. So we're a couple of iterations outside. To have an 80% correlation like that, that's like a very, very significant number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so this, and again, it's the strategy of, if I dismiss your feelings and your needs, if we have a problem or we have an issue that comes up and I continue to tell you, no, that's not a big deal, or that's not important, or stop being a baby about it, or you're just insecure, well, we're never going to make the relationship better. We're never actually going to resolve our problems. And that's what we see is these problems pile up. And soon you have this almost like all these issues just sitting in the relationship. And I call it kind of like dirty laundry, right? It's like all this stuff, they have stains, they have wine on it, they have mud on it, and it gets kind of thrown in a closet and it doesn't get dealt with. Well, eventually that stuff smells. And all of a sudden the house of your relationship stinks because you haven't addressed that stuff. And so when I'm working with couples, we got to pull some of that old stuff out and start to clean it.
Yeah.
You have to address it, those old wounds. And that's the problem, is when you dismiss feelings and needs, none of the stuff actually gets addressed. None of it becomes material to actually build a stronger relationship. It just gets kind of left in the scrapyard, per se.
That's a really great analogy. And I'm sure there are people who are listening right now who feel like they're living in a very stinky house. Mm-hmm. And so the next question is like, okay, if I'm an avoidant partner and it's really, really hard for me to lean into addressing the dirty laundry of our relationship, if I'm the one who throws it in the closet and says, let's just talk about it later or never talk about it again, or if I have a partner who I'm constantly trying to engage with and they just dismiss, withdraw, avoid. Let's get into the nitty gritties here and talk about what are some strategies or some tactics that we can implement in our relationship to try and deal with some of that laundry, to like throw a load in and start dealing with some of that really difficult, painful, emotional baggage that we've developed over time.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing is, I'm going to focus on the avoidant partner who's more withdrawn, and then we'll get to kind of the partner who's probably more anxious and more pursuing. The avoidant partner, one of the big things that really needs to shift is realizing that the strategy that you have is not working, right? And it's just to acknowledge that the intent behind it is actually really positive. If we pretend this bad stuff isn't here, we can still be together. I can still love you, right? And so that's kind of the intent, but it doesn't actually work. And so what we've seen in the research is the distancers need to re-engage and kind of show up emotionally. And one of the things they really need to work on is acknowledging that their feelings and their needs are important too. Because if they dismiss their feelings or they dismiss their needs, even to have alone time, well, they're going to be passive aggressive. They're going to be angry. They're going to shut down and do things without communicating, without disclosing that, hey, I need this, or hey, I'm really overwhelmed and I need to take a break. That's not going to get disclosed. And instead, we're going to have either big blow up conflicts where then the partner's going to the distance is going to walk out, and we're going to have a whole bunch of issues. So the big thing is acknowledging that first. And so within that, realizing that this strategy is a superpower and both a curse, right? The big thing that avoidance, and the reason it is a survival strategy, is it focuses on problem solving. Let's get this thing done and dealt with ASAP. And some of the ways is, let's not deal with it because I don't know what to do with it. Right? I don't have the answer. I feel helpless, so I'm going to pretend it isn't there. Right? That's a way to problem solve and try to get rid of it. But that also becomes a curse because often the avoidants do not have enough information to actually help their partner with it. They make snap judgments. Oh, you're upset? Well, you must be upset because this is going on with your family, or you're upset about this part. They make really quick judgments rather than slowing down and like, hey, help me understand what's going on here. And in that, they take responsibility for their partner's emotions. They take responsibility for their partner's problems, which is not a healthy relationship, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a big thing. I think with the avoidance, one of the biggest things that has been most helpful for them to see is you're not responsible for your partner's problems, but you can be a teammate in helping them understand and express it. And getting to understand what's going on for them is the best way to actually help them. And I have like one couple that comes to mind that I'm working with. The partner was like, I don't need you to problem solve 95% of my issues. Maybe 5%, and I'll come to you and I'll ask you for that. And you have lovely advice, but I desperately need you to understand me. I desperately need you to understand my feelings and acknowledge and validate it. And that's the big thing, is you have to go, if you're avoidant, to work from, how do I start to validate and acknowledge these feelings as real and not dismiss them? And that's the biggest thing to start with. And that understanding is huge. And what you do is you start to ask your partner open-ended questions about what they're feeling or what their thoughts are. You start to express your own feelings, right? And this is where the Gottman recipe comes in very well. I feel sad because you've been so upset with me about how I haven't helped out around the house, and I need us to figure out how to make this better for both of us, right? Those, again, feelings coming into the relationship and being used to build something better. So that's kind of the next step.
I love that. I have a metaphor that I want to kind of contribute here that has really helped me step out of that problem solving mode. And it's relevant, especially right now, because my wife is in the throngs of pregnancy. Presidency. She is the president of our house. Yeah. And she's also very pregnant. And one of the symptoms of pregnancy, as we all know, is nausea. And she has thrown up a lot over these last 8.5 months, very frequently just tossing her cookies. And I realized that when she's throwing up, there's very little that I can do to make things better. Like, I can't stop her from throwing up. I don't have any control over her body. It's not helpful for me when she's in the middle of throwing up to walk in and be like, start problem solving and say, have you not been taking your nausea medicine? Because, if you took your nausea medicine, it would make you not throw up as much. And I can't walk in and go, have you been eating stuff? Because when you eat stuff, like, it typically helps you settle your stomach a little bit. Maybe you haven't been eating.
Yeah. Can we slow down with this a little bit?
Yeah.
Why do you think you do that? What is going on emotionally for you that is causing you to propose those ideas and ask her and interrogate her with those questions? I
never do. I'm just using this as a metaphor. But
if you were, well, why?
Yeah. So to move with this analogy, I like the discomfort of having to sit there and watch her be sick. Like, she's uncomfortable. She's going through something painful. There's nothing I can do about it. And so, but I don't like sitting in that discomfort of watching my wife go through something painful and uncomfortable. I don't like sitting in the other room and listening to her retch. I don't like having her come out of the bathroom like all sweaty with like snot running down her mouth and like ready to burst into tears because like, I don't know what to do with all of that. Like, and if it was preventable, I would much rather prevent it than have to deal with that high emotion conversation.
Yeah, and what you're touching on is the core feeling of the avoidance strategy, which is, I don't know what to do. I'm helpless here.
Right.
And if I can't solve this, I don't know what to do with that. And since they don't have the ability to acknowledge their feelings, they tend to go into saying the very statements you said.
Yep. So the metaphor continues where if I want to be a good husband in those moments, I've learned that the best thing that I can do is I can stand by her side, or give her a little bit of space because she might be a little embarrassed and ashamed that she's throwing up. But I can do things like rub her back and say, I'm sorry, this really sucks. I can hold her hair. I can get her a cool cloth that she can put on her forehead afterwards to help her like feel a little bit better. And more than anything, I can just say, and she told me this the other day, she's like, the best thing that you can say is, I'm so sorry. This sucks so bad. This is just so crappy.
You can be with her emotionally.
Yep. And so I want to, what's helpful, what I've learned in doing like teaching workshops to couples, I've learned that when men can associate emotional pain with a physical, like vomiting, and that their job is to essentially hold the emotional garbage can for their wife and rub her back and say, I'm sorry, this really sucks. And just let her purge the negative emotions. What happens is they become way better listeners and they stop trying to problem solve. So I just want any men, any avoidant people who are listening, who are typical problem solvers, to think about when your partner is having a really big emotional reaction, when there's something they're frustrated about or sad about or upset about, instead, like, try and train yourself to think, okay, I need to hold the emotional garbage can here and just put my hand on their back and say, oh, this sounds really hard. This sounds really terrible. Tell me more. Did you get it all out? Do you need to get more out? And typically what happens after somebody vomits is they sit up and they go, oh, that feels so much better. And the same thing happens when they get emotionally validated, when they can get all that negative emotion out without having to try and have you fix it for them and turn them into a project. I always see this weight get lifted off their shoulders and they go, oh, I just feel so much better. So that analogy just might be helpful for a lot of guys who don't get how to access how do I empathize? You just hold the garbage can.
Yeah. Well, what I love about that too is the partner's doing a lot of things different. One, it's validating the other partner's reality. It's offering support, right? Oh, like I'm here with you in it. I've crawled into this difficult emotional space. And often that's what we desperately want. And three, there's not a problem solving or an urgency to push through it or get it done faster. It's this, okay, crap, you're going to throw up for the next 30 minutes, the next 2 hours. I'm going to sit here. And I say that because, well, yeah, in actual conversation, if you do hold that garbage can per se, it will go a lot quicker than that time period, because your partner will feel validated and cared for, and they actually get all that stuff out, just as you said, faster. I love that analogy. That's beautiful.
Okay, let's go. I love that you talked about problem solving and that's a natural thing and that we need to avoid doing that. You kind of gave a little bit of background on the experience of what it's like to be the partner who is more avoidant, like what's going on in their mind, what's going on in their world, and a little bit about what they can do. Is there anything else that you can think of that they can do other than stepping out of that problem solving space that can help them kind of step out of the avoidance and move more towards the center of that earned security?
Yeah, I think going back to that, they have to start expressing their feelings and needs.
That's right. Yeah, you mentioned that as well.
That's a huge thing. And they often don't. They kind of bottle this stuff up and hold it, and then they blow up, right? And here's the thing. Their partner will come and say, I think you're upset. And they'll be like, no. And 3 days later, they're pissed off, raging.
I'm fine.
Right.
I'm fine. Kyle, I'm fine.
But it's BS, right? But again, because the avoidance is, it's too risky for me to share these feelings with you. Emotionally, it's a huge risk for me to say, no, I'm not fine. I'm really hurting. Or I'm mad you did this. Or I feel like you don't care about me. What a vulnerable, risky thing to say. And that's why they say they're fine and fake it, right? And this goes back to the toughen up idea, fake it till you make it. But what we know is inevitably when you bottle emotions up, it's going to spew out in incidences that aren't relevant, right? I've seen partners have massive conflicts over spilled milk. Seriously,
literal spilled milk. Literally,
and it's like, and the other partner's like, what is this about? What is happening right now? And so that's a huge thing. Is if you choose to re-engage, you also have to show up and start sharing more about your inner world and exploring that. And the other thing about avoidant attachment, they often struggle to know those things. One, because no one did that for them. People who are secure had people who had significant interest in them. and was able to hold an emotional space to regulate their emotions, ask questions, say, hey, tell me about yourself. I want to know you. Avoidance, not so much. And so that's the other thing, is they got to take some time to kind of figure some, like, hey, what are my feelings? What are my needs?
That was actually going to be my very next question, because that's one of the first things that you mentioned, is that these people were people who typically are avoidant were never taught how to identify their emotions or deal with their emotions. And so for somebody who may have spent the last 2 to 3 or even 4 decades of their life avoiding these emotions and not knowing how to deal with them and not even knowing how to identify them, what are some resources or ways that they can start to kind of take ownership of the emotions that they feel and the desires that they have if they're so disconnected from them?
Yeah. So what I often ask is trying on feelings like a jacket, right? Does this fit me? And what we know from research is that when you do find an emotion that fits you and you verbalize it, your body actually relaxes, because it's like, yeah, that fits. And so there are wonderful feeling sheets. I mean, even Gottman has a card deck app that you can scroll through feelings and see what connects with you. And so that's what I encourage. And it's hard. It's a hard thing to go, what do I feel? What's going on for me right now? And I would say even secure people, or sometimes I'm struggling. I'm like, I got a lot of emotions. It feels like I have this emotional cocktail and I need some time to digest it. And so that's another thing to hold too. But giving yourself permission to take your time to explore and try things on. And over time, it's like riding a bicycle. Over time, it'll become more comfortable. You'll be able to ride eventually with no hands. You won't need all of the things that you needed initially.
Love that. So I will leave, if I remember this, I think I have a feelings sheet that people can print off. I know a lot. It's really helped a lot of couples that I've talked to who they've hung it on their fridge or put it in their bedroom. And when they're having a difficult conversation, they can turn to the sheet and be like, I'm feeling dismissed, or I'm feeling sad. And just being able to have the word there gives them access to a much better conversation. So,
yeah, it does. And that's emotion, I think, from Gottman and EFT, or emotionally focused couples therapy, drives kind of our relationships. We're emotional beings. Even though we want to be intellectual or logical, our logic is always shaped by our emotions.
Yeah.
Even if we choose not to, even if we pretend we're not emotional people.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I want to flip the table a little bit and let's talk about the partner of somebody who's avoidant, because I know that there's going to be many people who listen to this and they're going to be thinking, okay, my partner is the one who's checked out, and it doesn't matter how hard I try to get them to re-engage or try and make them feel safe. Every time I try to connect with them, get them to go to therapy, get them to show up for a workshop, get them to listen to a podcast, get them to do anything that might help us get closer together, they just move farther away. So what do you say to a partner of somebody who's avoidant that might be helpful to kind of pull them away from this withdrawal pattern that they're in and get them to help them to re-engage? Because you can't force somebody obviously to re-engage, but what can you do to kind of influence them to open up and feel a little bit more safe and make progress towards that more secure attachment?
Yeah, really kind of 2 things come up. The first is softening kind of the blame and the criticism and contempt.
Oof.
And going with, here's what I need, right? And this is, I think, people who are really wrestling with how do I express what I need often will go, I'm feeling so sad because of this thing, and I really need you to do this thing. Avoidance, again, we talk about that low threshold, low capacity. What can actually be really helpful is going, okay, I'm feeling really lonely, and going to your partner and saying, hey, I need a hug. Or I need us to go on a date. When can we go? Or I need you to plan a date. Can you do that? Again, action. It's almost like action oriented. You're using their strategy to help build the relationship a little bit better.
Interesting.
And as they do that, you use appreciation to reinforce those things that they're doing right. And you start to focus on what they're doing right. When they start to feel like, oh, I'm actually a good partner, there's actually more room to start to go, hey, like I've been really struggling with this, and here's what's going on for me emotionally. And then that's where I think there's some room opens up. And I would recommend, and as that partner feels appreciated, as they feel more a part of the relationship, then there's opportunities to show them stuff like this, or show them other things that can kind of go, oh, like there's some things I can do differently. Does that make sense? Because if they're in a place of I'm a terrible partner, I'm a failure, they're not very motivated, or they're stuck in this place of shame. That makes it really tough for them to engage and open up to things that could make some changes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that the natural approach that we have is, okay, my partner is withdrawn. I want to connect with them. I'm frustrated because I feel lonely, or I feel like I'm carrying a lot of the responsibility and the burden myself. And the strategy is to go to your partner and tell them all the things that they're doing wrong, or be angry and upset with them because you reached a breaking point. And you're like, I can't do this anymore. And because they have such a low tolerance for that, their emotions, if every time you approach them to talk about this stuff, there's even this much emotion, they go into that shutdown mode. So I love this strategy, softening the contempt, softening the blame, and then acknowledging and appreciating them for the efforts that they're making to make things better, and making very specific and clear requests. Give them some victories, and that can set them up to be successful. Do you have?
And one thing I want to acknowledge too.
Yeah.
Avoidantly attached individuals are hypersensitive to criticism. They might act like they're not, but and this is one of the things that I think I love to say during session of like, wow, you're so sensitive. You're so, I mean, they watch their partner's face. They watch when their partner walks in the room. They're making all these guesses, trying to see where their partner's at.
Yeah, they're really good at mapping their partner's mind. Like,
somewhat. They try to, but they often guess and misguess. But yeah, I mean, that's what they're trying to do. I'm trying to read you, but they look for signs that things are bad. Right? Where am I failing as a partner? And that's the other thing is, when you appreciate, that'll help. But realize if you come in and you start appreciating, then you come to them and say, oh, like, I feel like you're a terrible spouse and you don't do this, this, and this. They're going to shut down. And we know, just as Gottman's research has shown, that any negative comment is 5 times more painful than a positive.
Impactful. Yeah.
Impactful. It's a better word.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I've noticed that I've noticed that a lot of couples fall into the pattern of looking for the negative even inside the positive. So if it's like, hey, will you empty the dishwasher for me? And then your partner says, okay. And then they go empty the dishwasher, but they do it with the wrong attitude, or they're not like cheery about it. That their partner who's getting what they wanted still feels rejected or upset that they're not getting it the right way.
Right. And again, I think there's a hypersensitivity. Personally, I hate doing dishes, so I would not be really excited about that.
Right. Most people aren't.
Right. But I think that's a prime example is the other partner goes, oh, well, now they're doing it just because. But the reality is you can acknowledge they're doing it.
Right. And that's what I wanted to hit on. Perfect.
And that's where anxious attachment really comes in, is they go, oh, well, they're so sensitive to any tone, any facial expression. And just like the avoidant, they will make assumptions about that.
Right.
It's like he's going to do the dishes because I forced him to. He doesn't actually care about our household.
Right.
And they start going down this deep rabbit hole that's like, they don't care about me. Like it just gets, it gets really dark really fast.
Yeah. And that's a lot of what we talked about in our last workshop, is how the anxious person will manipulate their partner into giving them what they want. And then it might make them feel comfortable for a moment, but then they start to second guess whether it's coming from a place of authenticity. And then it's like, oh, now I need that reassurance that person really loves me. And so it's a really interesting cocktail of two ways of being that preys on each other and sends people into a negative spiral.
Well, and that's what, particularly with the anxious avoidant relationship, that's what we see.
Yeah.
Their strategies for connecting and relating to each other create this cycle, this pursue withdraw cycle, that leads to neither partner feeling seen, connected, loved, or cared for.
Do you have another story of maybe a couple who's come to meet with you and gone from that cycle and kind of broken it and got more to the secure attachment?
Yeah. In terms of,
I know I'm putting you on the spot, but
yeah, and that's a broad question. So like 6 different couples come to mind right now. I want to give people an example of what it's like to be, maybe particularly on the avoidant side, to have somebody in the relationship who's more avoidant. And then as you make
adjustments to your behavior and your tone and how you show up in the relationship, that person can come out of their avoidance and come back to a place of connection.
Okay, that helps me. So the couple I'm thinking of, again, they had this really intense pursuit withdrawal pattern. Could not read the avoidant partner's face. Never knew if the partner cared about her, and just really kind of struggled with that. I don't know if you even love me, right? And so that often led to a lot of conflicts. And so as we started to work on that, we explored their cycle, which we named, and we talked about that in the last workshop. And then really started looking at the avoidant partner's self-views and what was going on for them. I'm the failure. I can't do it right. Anytime something good is happening, there's always, the shoe's always going to drop. And so we explored that, and I helped them start to engage more and share more of their feelings, and then really help them in terms of listening to understand their partner. And this is where the speaker listener technique is really helpful. And with the other partner, helping them be really soft, right? I feel, instead of I feel that you never care about me. That's not a feeling, that's a thought. I feel scared that I'm not important to you, right? And what would help me feel better is if, you know, you made more statements about what you love about me. You know, and the partner goes, oh, I had no idea you were so scared about that. I thought you were okay. I thought we were fine. I can work on that. And that's what that partner said. And the partner started working on it. So that's an example of when we can soften, our partner can actually hear us a lot more. Mm. It's tough though, and it's also really risky. I mean, it's a heck of a lot easier for me to yell at you and say, Nate, you interrupt me all the time, and you never listen to me, compared to, hey, like I really feel like I'm not able to share what's going on for me, and I need you to just listen for a moment. Can you do that for me?
Tell me why it's more risky to go the first route instead of the second route, because based off of what you said earlier in the conversation, if the relationship continues without moving more towards the center of that earned secure attachment, then the relationship is probably doomed to failure. So it seems to me like the risk is greater to not change.
But this is the trap of it, right? It the patterns, right? There's so much internalization in self-views, right? The anxious partner, they don't care about me. I'm not lovable. I'm a terrible partner. The avoidant partner, I can never do it right. I'm a failure. Why are they even with me, right? All this stuff is happening that reinforces that. And so it's easier for me to criticize and attack you for my feelings than it is for me to kind of go, here's what happens for me. For me to kind of say, here's my heart, and I'm going to put it on a plate and show it to you without layering anything on that attacks you as an individual, but just says, hey, are you willing to meet this need? That's harder. That's riskier. Because you're giving your partner an opportunity to take your heart and hold it, or take your heart and throw it on the ground. That's why it's riskier. And a lot of people, I mean, even the couples I work with, I'll ask them to say something, and they'll look at me and be like, I don't know if I can. And I say, of course, it's so risky. It's scary, isn't it? It's like, if I say this, will they hear me? Will they understand me? That's what it is, isn't it? And then we talk about that.
And ultimately, that's what we want.
It is what we want.
The very core of love in a relationship is you just want somebody to get you. You want somebody to say, your experience is valid and I love you, or I see your flaws and insecurities and weaknesses and shortcomings, and I still love you. And I'm here for you no matter what. Mm-hmm. And the fear here is that if I do open my heart, I've been protecting it for so long, putting on that armor and like putting my dukes up and fighting, or withdrawing and running away and retreating. I'm afraid that if I show up into battle and I take off my armor, that this person that I love will just skewer me with the truth.
Or will decide that I'm not good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you never take the risk to have that conversation, you're going to always sit in the, well, what if? Like, How will you ever find out if you never take off the armor? How will you ever find out if you never stop retreating?
But yes, and it's so tough to do something that's so foreign.
Yeah, and it goes against your basic instincts.
Your survival strategies, right?
I've been thinking a lot about that lately, about how having a healthy, thriving relationship requires you to literally go against millions of years of evolutionary instincts that have been programmed into your DNA. You know, the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism is real, and it's part of what's makes us human. It's built into us, and it's a really great thing to keep us alive, but inside a 21st century relationship, it can be our downfall. And we literally have to learn, in many cases, to work against that evolutionary instinct that's just embedded in you without even thinking. You have to become conscious of it and be able to choose something different.
And you're exactly right. I mean, if we think about survival strategies and we think about, there's this theory called polyvagal theory, which uses the vagal nerve that regulates our nervous system, right? The fighting is an anxious style. The flight, avoidant, right? Those are survival strategies,
right?
What we know is evolutionary over time. What makes us human and why we are wired for connection is we have this next part of our human brain that uses human connection as survival. And that is where secure people are able to take more risk emotionally because they have those positive experiences of people being there for them, being available, being responsive, being engaged. And that is the ultimate form of survival. I can depend on you and you can depend on me. We're so much better as a team. We're so much better as a community when we can all relate and connect with each other. But if all we do is fight and we flee and do these things, it's really tough to stay with each other. And so you're right. We're kind of fighting against survival instincts at the more basic level. And we need to evolve and grow to using strategies of connection.
Yeah.
But that requires your body to feel safe enough to take that risk. And that's the other thing. I mean, I work with these clients and I go, what's going on in your body? You know, I see your face looks tense. I'm seeing you hold yourself like this. What's happening? Oh, I feel like I can't be here right now. It's so hard for me to be here. And then I go, wow, you're here. How are you tolerating this? How are you staying here? She must mean the world to you if you're able to do this, right? And we start to build that connection. We start to build that attachment. So,
yeah, I wonder, like even just as you were talking about your body, you just brought it up, and I started thinking about my body in this moment, and I'm like, is my jaw clenched? And maybe the listeners can do this right now. Like, check your jaw. Is it clenched? Is your tongue pressed to the roof of your mouth? You know, are you taking shallow breaths or deep breaths? Are your shoulders tense? Talking about this, what could be a very emotional topic for you. You know, do you feel like a tension in your low back? Are your hands a little bit sweaty? You know, some people that are watching this right now might be in the very early stages of fight or flight. Just talking about this thing that is really difficult in your relationship right now, and your body has such an impact on your physiology, on your emotions, and vice versa,
and your thoughts too,
and so just becoming aware of your body and how your body is responding to the circumstances that you're in can have a huge impact on your ability to let your guard down or not put on your running shoes to run away and stay present in the relationship. So next time you have one of these difficult conversations, a conversation where your partner might withdraw or you might withdraw and become more avoidant, check in on your body first and foremost. Can you take some deep breaths? Can you relax that jaw? Can you speak openly to your partner about where you're at physically, like what your body's doing?
But what you're sharing is actually very, very important. And I'm glad we're touching on this. As a partner, as an avoidant, as an anxious partner, if you can soothe yourself and be softer in your interactions, you will be able to hear your partner better and you'll be able to speak softer.
Yeah.
It is huge, right? If I'm pissed off and I'm anxious and tense and I'm going to blast you. That's just what's going to happen because I am in that flight mode.
Yeah.
If I am withdrawn, if I'm shut down, I'm not going to engage more. But if I can breathe and soothe myself and do what Gottman calls relationship enhancing thoughts, which you and I talked about in a previous podcast, right? Then we can regulate our nervous systems enough to actually build some connection. And this is what I think humans long for, is that desire to co-regulate each other and soothe ourselves enough so we can have that co-regulation. And we can have that felt sense of security, the felt sense that I can rely on you and you can rely on me. That we are in this world together, even in the chaos, the uncertainty, and we're going to go through it. And that's also Gottman's research shows, is that couples, hell, we go through so much stuff. Pregnancies, losing parents, chronic illnesses, depression, anxiety, PTSD, a whole bunch of stuff, disabilities, right? And at that core, we desperately just need connection and that security, that you can accept me as I am and I can accept you as you are, and we can navigate these difficulties together. And I think that's really the core of it.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Man, I could just cut that snippet out, and if everybody listened to it every morning, I think that we would all be a little bit better off. Just that affirmation of like, this is what this is all about. This is why we're in this. One other tip that I think is helpful for people who might be a little bit more analytical and detached from their emotions is having a notebook.
Absolutely.
Like, when you have these difficult conversations, take a pen and paper with you and take notes on what your partner is saying. And that will help you maintain access to, you don't take things as personally. Mm-hmm. You treat it like a news reporter taking notes on an interview instead of a person being attacked by an enemy. And that could be helpful managing that physiology. That's all.
And this is John Gottman's #1 strategy for listening to Julie. He is a world-renowned therapist. And she goes, we have a problem. The first thing is, where's my notebook?
Yeah.
And because
I didn't realize that, but it doesn't surprise me.
Right. Because for him, he's like, if I can write what she's saying, I can take notes and I can just have it as notes. And then I get to go and oh, wow, so you really are hurting this, or this upset you, and you're really needing this. It helps. And instead of being like, oh my gosh, I'm a failure, I'm doing these things, you're busy writing.
Yeah.
It does help a lot.
Man, we've covered a billion zillion strategies here, and I really appreciate that. I know we have like 1 or 2 questions that have popped up in the comments that I want to address before we sign off, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
One, I kind of gave you a preview of beforehand. Janet said that she and her partner took a kind of an attachment quiz, and that her partner was in the dismissive attachment quadrant. Can you talk about what dismissive attachment is? And I know we talked about anxious and avoidant, and I believe dismissive falls under the category of avoidant, but can you just speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, and it's kind of what we talked a lot about. Dismissive avoidance dismiss feelings and attachment needs and vulnerabilities. They do not disclose things. And there's this stance of, I'm not going to get engaged with this stuff, right? And what happens is, in intimate relationships, they do that to their partner because that's their strategy. And so, as we talked about, the strategy to changing that is to experiment with that dismissive partner, really starting to explore their emotions and validate their partner's feelings, right? Seeking to understand before problem solving. That if you can start to do that, your partner will feel a lot better and you'll feel a lot better. It's going to be tough because it's going to go counter. You're going to hear your partner express feelings, and the part of you is going to go, that's a dumb feeling. That's not valid. Right? And you have to go, hold on. How can I let that be valid? How can I let that be real? And that takes some time. That takes some work. And so that's a big thing. And what we talked about, right? The dismissive husband of a wife's feelings predicts divorce and predicts stability in this insecure level of the relationship. And so by changing that, it really requires them to seek to understand emotions and start to sit with them and validate them. And that's what I see is, when I'm working with couples, the other partner is like, just sit with me in the feelings. Just be here with me. That's all I need.
Yeah.
And just like you said with the trash can, you couldn't have put it better. I think if the dismissive partner can do that and realize that they don't have to take their partner's feelings away, which is a core belief of a dismissive partner. They are not responsible for their partner's feelings. Again, a core belief of a dismissive partner. they can all of a sudden relax and be more connected. I think that's a big, huge thing. Does that answer that, do you think?
I love it. That was beautifully answered. And I just want to point out while you're on here that we did get a comment that said, what a great conversation. This is fascinating.
Good.
So I'm glad we had some people tuning in live today. Before we log off, I want, do you have anything else that you want to add or contribute to the conversation? You've given us so much already, but I don't want to leave something unsaid if you had something rattling around in there.
Well, I also see in the comments there's an attachment quiz that people are looking for. I think the one you sent is the most well-researched one. It's the experiences in close relationship.
Great.
And so that is the one that is most often used to assess attachment styles. And right, I will kind of say that avoidant attachment styles, because they don't know themselves, will sometimes show up secure on those tests.
Good to know.
Because they're like, oh yeah, I let people get close to me. I like this stuff. Like, I love this stuff.
But it's their version of close and not like a real actual close, because they don't know what actual close.
Yeah, it's to them. It's, oh yeah, I'm lovable. That makes sense, right? I don't have anything to worry about. But then when things get distressful, that's where all these strategies start to come in and they start to distance.
Yeah,
and there's actually an interview called the Adult Attachment Interview, which has a lot of effectiveness in kind of predicting attachment styles. But again, it's really looking in your behaviors around conflict and emotional closeness. And those things, and support. How do I support my partner? Those are kind of the core areas where you'll start to see how these styles show up. And even if you listen to this workshop or the workshop you and I did 2 weeks ago, you'll get an idea of kind of those different behaviors and some of the thoughts that really highlight those styles.
Love it. All right. Now, where I know people are going to want to hear more from you, just remind them where they can go get more Kyle in their life if they so desire.
Yeah, I would just head to kylebenson.net. I actually have an article that's pretty popular, kind of explaining things from the emotionally unavailable partner's perspective and kind of how hard it is for them. And a lot of people resonate with that. And then there's also another article that talks about this pursuit withdrawal pattern. I actually have like 5 or 6 on that. And so there's a lot of action kind of building on what you and I talked about. And I would just recommend even just taking notes from this workshop, because there's a ton here that if you start to apply this, I can guarantee you it will be tough and it will lead to some changes.
Janet said, I'm still unclear on how avoidant is different than dismissive.
So yeah, Janet, avoidant has really kind of 2 different categories in terms of the research. I mean, without going too much into detail, there is kind of this fearful avoidant, which is I fear getting close to anyone, and more of a dismissive avoidant. So it is still an avoidant strategy. It's just a different type.
It's like a subcategory.
Right. And so it is just, again, it's just they don't acknowledge feelings. They don't acknowledge attachment needs, and they dismiss that stuff. I mean, that's a core thing. Right? They're avoiding and they're dismissing relational dynamics and relational things that are core to being human beings.
Love
Does
it.
that answer your question?
There's a bit of a lag between us and when the comments come in. So I hope that answered the question. We'll give her a second to provide clarity, but would you mind sending me the links to those 2 articles that you mentioned, and I'll make sure to include them in the description. I'll add them to the description of the video on Facebook and in our little members area.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, yes, that was helpful.
Cool. Okay.
All right, guys. And just to let you know, this is just a starting point. Like, the information is great. The information, I know there's going to be people who listen to this conversation and they have that aha moment. They have the epiphany. Oh, this is the problem in our relationship, or this is the cycle. This is the pattern that is keeping us from having the type of connection that we want. And having that realization is great, but what really fixes it isn't the realization. It's taking action, like what Kyle just said. It's taking some of these tips that Kyle outlined and implementing them. And if you need help implementing them, talk to Kyle. I don't know if he's taking clients right now, but don't be afraid to reach out to him, because he works with couples one-on-one, which is something that I don't do. And he is masterful at guiding them through these processes and lending them a hand when they need it, when they can't do it on their own. And I think all of us need help from time to time. So there's no shame in reaching out to get support from somebody who has an expertise and an opinion from the outside. So if you are in that position, I want to encourage you and just remind you that taking action is what gets you results. And if you need help taking action, there are definitely resources at your disposal. And I don't want you to get stuck because you just don't know who to reach out to. And Kyle's a great resource. And
even if I can't work with you per se, I will definitely send you some people who I think can.
Yeah, and I can do the same. Like if so, reach out to either one of us if you feel like you need help doing on the implementation side, and we're more than happy to get you in touch with the right people and the right resources, so that you don't. The worst thing in the world would be to have the information that could fix your problems and make things better, and not be able to put it into practice. Like that's a depressing situation to be in, to have the answers and then just not take action on them. So,
and I think you're saying that because you're really wanting people to have hope that things can be different for them.
Yeah. I saw a post on Facebook yesterday that really resonated with me. And this guy said, would you rather be a thought leader or a results leader? And thought leadership doesn't interest me. I am interested in helping people get results. And that's what this community is all about, is helping people have a positive trajectory in their life and in their marriage. And that only comes through it's the small things done often, taking action on the little things that will make a big difference in your relationship. And those little things aren't always easy, but if you take some of the little things that Kyle talked about today and start implementing them, or you need help implementing them, there's no shame in seeking out a little bit more support. So thank you, Kyle, for being here. Thank you for sharing your expertise. You're brilliant at what you do. And I hope that there are people here who will watch this interview over and over and over and over again until they get it and start making that transformation in their relationship.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is, you're on a journey with your relationship and your marriage, and it's going to take some work, but that work can lead to building something down the line that is really rewarding and beautiful. And I think in my work with couples, it's been so phenomenal to be like, oh, we've had this pattern for the past 18 years and now it's different. Wow. Right?
Right.
Those are huge things. Those are huge statements. And so even if you're, been together for 40 years, whatever that is, there are ways to change some stuff that feels stuck. And it will be hard, but it will be worth it. And that's, I think, the thing that, Nate, you're really trying to highlight.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Kyle, for being here. And I think that's the end of our little workshop today. Thanks for listening to today's show. It means a lot that you tuned in. It especially means a lot if you are an avoidant person. If this whole interview was kind of talking about how you show up in your relationship, your avoidant tendencies. I know that avoidant people tend to get emotionally overwhelmed a little easier, and hearing a conversation like the one I just had with Kyle could have been very difficult to sit through for you. So I just want to commend you if that's you, and say thank you for hanging in there and listening and doing the work to work on your relationship. If you have a partner who is avoidant, I hope this conversation helped you to develop some empathy for them and a better understanding of what it is they might be going through that might be making it difficult for you to connect with them and move forward in your relationship. As always, if you want more conversations like the one I had with Kyle today, please hit the subscribe button. This is something I do on a weekly basis. I publish something with the intent of helping you have a stronger and more connected relationship. And if you want to do something great for your relationship today, I think one of the best things you can do is just hit the little red button and subscribe, maybe even hit the notification bell next to it so that you know when I publish a future interview or video, so that you can make sure that you've got all the tools and resources that you need to have the type of relationship that you really want. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope to see you next week.